Hello, I am Enrique Quesada, and this is Mexico-Centered, a podcast from the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Much is made about the rhetoric we hear from Presidents Donald Trump and Andrés Manuel López Obrador, but the relationship between U.S. and Mexican states continues to grow in volume and significance through their subnational governments. Whether pursuing increase in exports, attracting foreign direct investment, or providing assistance to their immigrant citizens, diplomacy between states across the border has increased at a rate of about 20% every 5 years. In a new edited volume titled The Future of U.S.-Mexico Relations, Strategic Foresight, Lucas McMillan and Jorge Schiavon write, quote, "The future of U.S.-Mexico relations will not only be determined by government officials in Mexico City and Washington, D.C., nor in the boardrooms of multinational corporations. Instead, it will be heavily influenced by officials in places such as Guadalajara and Monterrey, as well as Austin and Tallahassee." To talk more about how governors and mayors have engaged with their counterparts on the other side of the border over the last couple of decades and what this tells us about the relationship moving forward, I called Lucas McMillan and Jorge Schiavon. Lucas McMillan is the Dean of the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences and an Associate Professor of Political Science at Lander University in Greenwood, South Carolina. His work focuses on the foreign relations of subnational governments. Jorge Schiavon is a professor of international relations in the Department of International Studies at the Centro de Investigación y Docencia Económicas, CIDE, in Mexico City. A member of Mexico's national system of researchers, he has written extensively on Mexico's foreign policy and diplomacy, both at the federal and state levels. Here's my conversation with Lucas McMillan and Jorge Schiavon. Lucas McMillan, Dean of the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences and Associate Professor of Political Science at Lander University, and Jorge Schiavon, Professor of International Relations in the International Studies Department at CIDE in Mexico City. Thank you for accepting the invitation to be on the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you.
So I'm looking forward to talking with you about the role of state and local governments or sub-state governments and the binational relationship between the United States and Mexico. Over the course of this podcast, there have been several episodes where the role of governors of U.S. states and Mexican states comes up as an important part of both market integration and also security coordination. Usually, though, we focused on national level politics, both in terms of policy and rhetoric, and only in passing do we mention sub-state governments. So just to kind of set the stage here, can you speak about the term paradiplomacy and what are the different ways in which sub-state governments are engaging in it?
Paradiplomacy is defined as the engagement in foreign relations activities by sub-state or subnational authorities. And paradiplomacy is really a shortened term for parallel diplomacy. Those that study paradiplomacy would see that parallel is really an ideal, and it is not always the case because there is sometimes conflict between what the levels of government at the national and subnational want to do, what messages they want to send, and what strategies they wish to employ. When we think about paradiplomacy in our research, we are looking at what U.S. states and Mexican states have done and their leaders have done. And you would find that they have done things like the governors traveling outside of their own country, the state legislature or the governor finding a way to form an office that operates outside of the country and seeks to promote exports, attract foreign investment, promote tourism, and in the case of Mexico, help to serve a migrant community that is abroad. We have seen that governors, state legislatures, and others have signed agreements to enhance cooperation on a host of different topics, particularly economic development, but not just that, also education, culture, the environment, human rights, all sorts of things. And we're talking about the institutions that have been created, particularly those binational institutions that bring together governors, bring together mayors, bring together state legislators. And all of this means that your subnational actors are engaged, not just with international institutions or IGOs, but very much engaged with global NGOs, non-governmental actors. So all of these things make up paradiplomacy. The United States has been participating in it since about 1950, and Mexican states followed after market and political liberalization in the 1990s.
So when I hear about state governments working with their counterparts across the border, so especially border states is where I hear about it the most, I wonder about the legal framework under which this takes place, right? Because both the U.S. and Mexico are work under a federal system, and dealing with international actors, we mostly see it as being the role of a national government. But here, the states are looking out for their own interest in an international global community. So kind of what is the legal framework, right? And how have these relationships across the border developed and expanded over time?
Well, scholars would certainly say that a federal system is a dynamic system. And so when we think about Mexico and the United States, we are talking about federal systems. We're talking about presidential systems. But we are talking about systems that evolve. And so you've got complex intergovernmental relationships, and you've got complex dynamics of federal authority. Who gets to do what, when, and how? And there have been forays into foreign relations for a very long time, since the beginning of the American Republic, the United States Republic. And so you've had different iterations of this, but it's really not until the 20th century when you have modern transportation and telecommunications that really open up new advantages for sub-state or subnational authorities to participate in international relations. And so this has meant that governors, state legislatures, have pushed against constitutional limitations. They have sometimes been taken to court. Courts have sometimes denied their ability to do things, overturned their ability to do things. But what it means is that there is an ebb and flow with constitutional push and pull. Sometimes the courts have had to clarify. Sometimes the national legislature has preempted U.S. states and localities. But in a world of globalization, economic, political, social, and cultural, we believe that the constituent units at the subnational level will continue to likely push against national level totality of control in foreign relations. That's why this makes an excellent avenue for more research in this vein.
And if I could also say something on the Mexican side, what we have seen is that with this growing activity of Mexican subnational governments, there was a legal change in 1992 with the creation of the Law of Celebration of Treaties in the Mexican case, which creates a mechanism called interinstitutional agreement. An interinstitutional agreement is that through which Mexican subnational governments can relate with foreign counterparts and generate cooperation. And they have been so successful that currently only after 20-something years, 25, 26 years of the creation of this mechanism, we have 1,094 interinstitutional agreements between Mexican subnational governments and foreign counterparts. What's interesting to know is that the vast majority of these interinstitutional agreements are concentrated with the United States. Practically 25% of them are just with one country, the US. And within those, 70% of all those 250-something interinstitutional agreements are with only 4 states, which are the US border states. That is Texas in the first place, California second place, Arizona third, and then New Mexico. So 70% of all international mechanisms of cooperation of Mexican subnational governments are concentrated in just 4 U.S. states, which are the U.S. border states.
And most of these agreements are in terms of trade?
That's the interesting thing. This law on the celebration of treaties clearly specifies that subnational governments can only sign agreements in those areas in which they have powers. So what we see is a concentration of these agreements in 5 different areas, which are cooperation in education, science and technology, culture, promotion of exports, and promotion of foreign direct investment. So those are the 5 areas in which they concentrate mostly, exactly to achieve the objectives that Professor McMillan has said, which are undoubtedly promoting the exports, attracting foreign direct investment, and also generating decentralized cooperation in those areas, which can generate local development at both sides of the border.
I think one of the things we would point out is that there has been now consistent grump that the national level authorities have not handled well many issue areas. And so this has really driven some of the constitutional conflict that has occurred on issues related to the environment or immigration or border security or human rights, that national level authorities have not either paid enough attention or come up with resolution in the ways that were pleasing to governors and state legislatures or local officials like city councils and mayors. And so that's where you get the conflict, is that paradiplomacy is pushed when different levels of government don't feel that an issue has been adequately resolved for their citizens.
So you work together in writing this chapter titled The Future of U.S.-Mexico Relations, the Role of Sub-State Governments, and this is a part of a larger collection of essays on the binational relationship looking ahead. So analyzing the past and the present to see where this relationship is heading. You delineate in this chapter 3 scenarios. One is the baseline scenario, which you argue is what is most likely to continue, a worst-case scenario and a best-case scenario. Could you describe what these are and what you think that this baseline scenario, kind of the status quo, will prevail despite the nationalistic rhetoric that we continue to hear from both Presidents Trump and López Obrador?
Yes, let's start with the worst case scenario. Things go mad in the bilateral U.S.-Mexico relations. Trump gets reelected. López Obrador doesn't care about internationalization and foreign policy. Therefore, the worst case scenario is to stay at the levels at which we are currently, that is approximately somewhere around 1,000 international agreements and 25% of them with the U.S. The best case scenario would be that the current trend that we have observed in the course of the last 15, 20 years, which is an increase of 30% every 5 years in terms of paradiplomacy between Mexican and U.S. states, doubles itself. That means a 60% increase every 5 years. That would be probably too much, especially with what we're seeing in world affairs in terms of the trade war between the U.S. and China, in which obviously Mexico gets affected, but also in terms of what's happening with COVID-19 and also the renewal of nationalism. What we would expect to happen is that current trends continue as they are right now, in the sense that we will see in the future an increasing 30% in paradiplomacy between Mexican and U.S. subnational governments every 5 years. That means that only in a few years we will see the number of international agreements double. Why? Because it is subnational communities and subnational actors like businessmen, like the governors, like civil society organizations, who are most interested in continuing an open and fruitful bilateral relation between Mexico and the U.S., and they will push for this to happen. The best case to explain this is President Trump saying that he would throw NAFTA to the garbage. Well, he couldn't step out of NAFTA because he was pushed by subnational governments and also other relevant actors saying that Mexico is extremely important for U.S. exports, but also in terms of Mexican exports. So Mexico now is the first trading partner of the U.S., and the U.S. is the first trading partner of Mexico. So national governments are the ones who benefit from this, and therefore we should expect the current trend to continue in the future.
Yeah, I think that you can get caught up in short-term oriented, nationalist, protectionist-oriented rhetoric. mainly because of the loud megaphone that is given to Donald Trump and López Obrador, when actually what you see in the data is that trade has been very fruitful and trade has been very beneficial to both sides of the border. And so, in fact, since we wrote this chapter, Mexico has become the number one trading partner of the United States. And then, although President Trump may have had rhetoric that he would just throw NAFTA to the garbage bin, instead, it's a whole host of actors in Congress, among the governors and state legislatures, and most importantly, the business lobby. And they come together and say, no, you're not, and this is what would serve our interest. And so even when, the subnational government authorities may not have the best way to get in touch with or control the agenda with national level authorities, the business lobby has been very supportive and has perhaps taken over and replicated those wants. And so that's why we see really much more continuity than change in the future. And we see perhaps a way for your kind of chamber of commerce, traditional Republicans to still have a lot of ways of shaping policy. And frankly, we see on the U.S. side in the Democratic Party more comfort with global trade, which is historically, of course, a change when the progressives and the left of the Democratic Party have not been very comfortable with global trade. So, if you look at the USMCA, it didn't have many naysayers when it came time to the vote. And so we see a lot more continuity and would encourage everybody to look past the rhetoric, look more at the policy and what is likely to last.
So you wrote this chapter before the USMCA and it came into effect, and I don't know if before it was ratified, since it was only recently done in March by Canada, right? And so I was wondering if you thought NAFTA or the new NAFTA 2.0, the USMCA as it's known in the U.S., how this would impact our diplomacy, and you seem to think that it will have positive impact on this.
Yes, undoubtedly, in the sense that what it provides is certainty. What we had with NAFTA since 1994 is certainty in terms of the trade and financial flows between the two countries. And with the signing of the new agreement, TEMEC or USMCA, which sounds like YMCA, so I'll never forget it, what you're providing is certainty. So therefore, yes, it is very positive, and therefore I completely agree with Dr. McMillan in the sense that what we will see is continuity.
So a new development that we cannot fail but to address is the COVID-19 pandemic, and this has disrupted assembly lines. Lines that depend on this trade between the two countries. This happened earlier in the summer, and border crossing through land, it's limited to essential travel, and the date when normal transit would resume just keeps getting pushed back further and further. So I'm wondering if you see this as impacting paradiplomacy in any way, where the national governments are trying to deal with the pandemic, or maybe not deal with the pandemic in some ways, right? What are states doing? How do you think that this will affect the way in which they interact with each other?
Well, certainly I think that tourism has been hit very hard. And I think we forget that there is much cross-border tourism between Mexico and the United States. There is still a fair number of Americans that go to Mexico and Mexicans that come to the United States, and they spend a lot of money. And that does mean a lot of jobs that are supported. So this has clearly hurt all of those areas in both countries. We do also see that there is foreign investment going both ways. Now, both of those, when you look at trade, are dwarfed by the trade flows. And so, again, it's really in this year, 2020, that Mexico has become the number one trading partner of the United States. I tend to think that COVID has disrupted supply lines to such a degree, and that the animosity now between Beijing and Washington is one that perhaps may benefit the relationship between Mexico City and Washington. And so when you think about the closeness of North American economic and cultural integration, when you think about the many long historical and cultural ties between Mexico and the United States, when you think about more linguistic capacity on both sides of the border between the United States and Mexico, all of these things really point to an opening that could be seized by subnational authorities and certainly could be seized by national level authorities, and that how they do that remains to be seen. But I think that the geographic orientation of the countries, the long-term economic framework that is there, now given stability by an agreement that was finally formalized, all of that points to what could be a healthy relationship. But a healthy relationship doesn't ever mean that conflict is absent. It doesn't mean that there will not be big disagreements. It just means that there's always a table to go to.
I completely agree with Dr. McMillan, and COVID-19 will only be a bump in the road of integration in North America. And what we actually saw is that both governments cooperated and decided to close the border. And then a few weeks after that, they decided to open the border, not to everyone. That is, the flow of human beings is, yes, restricted between Mexico and the US, but due to binational supply chains and binational production, the border is open for trade and the border is open for investment. So that gives you a very good idea on how important Mexico is for the US and the US is for Mexico, in the sense that even in the times of coronavirus, we have open borders, not for people, but yes, for goods, services, and capital. Therefore, it will just be a bump in the road. Yes, there will be some effect in 2020, but I guess that by 2021, things will be back to the normal and regular trends.
Yeah, I was thinking just now that like the status quo and remaining with this baseline doesn't mean that it doesn't change. It means that it's increasing, right? Just as it has been doing. And you mentioned the kind of having the ways, like the tables to like talk about these issues. And I was thinking about the policy recommendations you make. And so I kind of just wanted to end with that. It seems to me that most of the recommendations are about creating institutions, like kind of institutionalizing the ways in which sub-state governments engage with each other across borders.
Yes, I think one of the things that if you look at the history of the relationship is that the institutions have changed. And so from time to time, institutions die, and from time to time, new institutions are created. So I think what Professor Schiavon and I are both saying is you would have better cooperation if you would both talk to one another and come up with a plan so that a network can be better managed. And that does mean that we look at recommendations like commissions, offices, bilateral groups, and in some cases, just in the case of the United States, getting everyone on the same page about who can do what. So we would do a lot better, certainly if strategies could be better studied and it was better delineated who was doing what. But I'll let Jorge speak about some more of our recommendations.
We actually provide in the chapter 10 recommendations, of which Professor McMillan has already mentioned some. I would like to concentrate just by saying that it's important to facilitate that representatives of Mexican and U.S. states can open offices abroad for the representation of their interests. Also, to increase the number and activities of consulates to include the promotion of paradiplomacy at both sides of the border. And it's extremely important to strengthen sub-state official capacities in international affairs through training on best practices, protocol, analysis of foreign policy, and foreign policy development. We still see at the subnational level an important area of opportunity to increase the capacities of these subnational governments, but also it is important to strengthen, as Professor McMillan said, the mechanisms of cooperation between subnational government associations like CONAGO in the case of Mexico, which is the Governors Association, to also include international affairs within their discussions and their work. And finally, it is extremely important to challenge sub-state officials to conduct paradiplomacy in a transparent way. That is, to show their populations that they're actually investing in paradiplomacy to generate better living conditions, more security and benefits, economic benefits at the local level, and not just that they are traveling around the world and enjoying it. So transparency is paramount in terms of guaranteeing that paradiplomacy continues to grow and it is perceived socially as positive in terms of generating development at the local level.
Lucas McMillan, Dean of the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences at Lander University, and Jorge Schiavon, Professor of International Relations at CIDE, thank you so much for answering these questions.
Thank you.
Thank you for your kind invitation. And read the chapter and buy the book. It's really good.
That was Lucas McMillan and Jorge Schiavon. To learn more about the edited volume titled The Future of U.S.-Mexico Relations Strategic Foresight, you can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico. The Center, together with its partners, will be hosting a fall webinar series to highlight the research presented in the book. You can find more information on our website. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to Mexico Centered. Thanks to Lisa Wakata, our program manager, and to Tony Payan, the director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. You can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico, where you can find our latest publications. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host, and do not necessarily reflect those of the Center. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at usmexicocenter@rice.edu. We would love to hear from you. Mexico Centered is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Radio Public, and Spotify. You can subscribe through your favorite podcast app to receive all of our new episodes directly on your phone. I am Enrique Quesada. I will see you next time.